Anyway, let's get to our big interview of the hour. For the latest on the U.S. China trade war, let's welcome our special guest. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross joins us in studio. This was yesterday, the big trade war with China. Today, Wilbur, we're going to get right to that. We will. But I just got to ask you about the yield curve. And as an administration official, I would not suggest that you should say we're going to have a recession in 12 to 18 months. That probably would not be the take that I would have on this. But a lot of people say that's what this indicates. What do you think?
Well, formulas like that work when they work, and they don't work when they don't work. There's also a question how far into the future. Eventually, there will be a recession. So the idea that 1/1000th of 1% inversion, which is what I saw on your screen a little before, is going to be the end of the economy, strikes me as a little aggressive.
Yeah, it's the point being made that rates are so low. There's a difference between a 7% short rate and a 6% 30-year or 10-year, and when you're down and it's basis points at 2, and rates are negative around the world.
1/1000th of 1%.
You're good at that stuff. That's how much the tariff on aluminum cans were too. Remember when you're good at these really, really small numbers. Let me ask you about the deal that was announced yesterday, or the reprieve that we saw yesterday. I don't know if we know for sure whether there were any concessions from China yesterday on that phone call, or whether this was purely a move unilaterally by the president to make it easier for consumers at Christmas time. Did China blink on anything, or was this totally unilateral?
There had been all sorts of research done before. There were public hearings about what items to put on, and nobody wants to take any chance of disrupting the Christmas season. We don't think there was much.
So you're saying we didn't extract anything from China to do this? There was no quid pro quo?
Not a quid pro quo.
No quid pro quo.
A decision made to do what we decided to do, namely just be a little extra protective.
The president said, we'll see whether they follow through this time on some ag buys, right, which seemed to indicate to some people that there was some behind-the-scenes maneuvering and some tentative deal there, too. Do you know? Can you comment on that?
Well, going back to when we broke off the talks, they had very publicly, when we were all in the Oval Office, committed to buying lots of soybeans, doing all kinds of things, in addition to that we thought we had a very detailed deal on the basic trade issues. They didn't deliver on any of that, and I think that's what the president was referring to.
You also are saying that where you'd like to get, and maybe there's the phone call resumption in 2 weeks that we're going to see on the phone.
Right.
Do you think you said they might be back to where they were before things broke down on some of the big issues, IP, some of the things that we say that they reneged on? Are they back to where they were, or are they getting in that position, or has there been no movement whatsoever?
I think until something is really formally announced and mutually agreed, it's a little premature to say where anybody is. But we had 3 objectives in the beginning. Those are the same 3. One was increase current trade, reduce the deficit. That's the easy part. If that's all we wanted, would have had a deal 2 years ago. Second part was structural reforms. The problem of technology transfers being forced, problems of not fair market access to foreigners, that whole list of things you're familiar with. That takes legislation, and that's a big ask. But the third and most important is a deal that's verifiable and enforceable. We need all 3 components, so it isn't a question of just agreeing on something.
But it's often these in-person negotiations that are much more productive than any of the phone calls that have transpired. Did China commit to coming to Washington in early September?
I don't think it's a question about anybody committing to anything. What we're interested in is having discussions that focus on where we thought we were.
But the White House has said frequently that they have invited the Chinese delegation to Washington in early September for negotiations. Is that formalized?
I don't believe a date has been set. You'll notice all that was discussed was perhaps another phone call in a couple of weeks.
Today is also a significant day because I believe it's the day that the 3-month general license that was provided to Huawei comes up. Can you update us?
No, it comes up on Monday.
Okay. Can you update us then on where that process stands to issue more specific licenses?
On Monday, I'll be happy to update you.
Let me ask you a separate question, Mr. Secretary, which is, has the administration done any type of concrete analysis, economic analysis, of the economic impact of these tariffs internally? Is there a piece of paper? Is there some real analysis that looks at this? Given we talk about analyses that are done by Goldman Sachs and all sorts of agencies and banks and investors and analysts, but what kind of analysis is done inside the administration on this?
About what we just did yesterday?
What you did yesterday, but also what's been taking place over the last several months in terms of this bigger approach.
Well, in terms of yesterday, it was only certain products, namely those that are 75% or more supplied by China. And the reason we use that as a cutoff is it's very hard to replace quickly somebody who's a 75% supplier. The earlier things we had done were ones where China was a much lower percentage, therefore much easier to replace them. So that was one of the sorting devices.
Right. But is there an analysis that says, okay, if we put these tariffs on, this is what the cost is going to be on the American consumer, this is what the cost is going to be on American farmers, this is what we're going to end up having to pay out. I mean, a full sort of analyses, if you will, in the same way that Goldman Sachs over the weekend put out its own analysis of what this all means.
Well, they can put out analyses and someone else will put out a different analysis.
Right. I'm suggesting, is there an internal one, and what does that look like?
We do a lot of analyses, but the important thing is you're trying to judge people's reaction. What's going to happen to currency? That has an impact on the inflation that might come from tariffs. What are they going to do by retaliation? You have to make guesses as to each of those in order to make a sensible thing. So you need a whole matrix, not a single point analysis.
You know,
the fact is there is not very much inflation in the economy. Import prices, in fact, have been very stable. And the study done in Europe indicated that of the 25% tariff we had put on, 20.5 or thereabouts was borne by the Chinese, and 4 point some odd was borne by Americans.
But how much of the import price stability is based on China's currency devaluation, which the administration has criticized, but which the president last week acknowledged actually benefits U.S. consumers?
Well, it's not a question of whether we like it or not. It's a fact that the currency has gone down. That does offset tariffs. So that's a fact. It's not a matter of opinion.
On the phone call where we informed China that there would be the reprieve, it was said that we made it clear that this was not a concession to China. Was that a point that we thought was important to make?
It wasn't even a debate. We had decided before that to do that.
Okay, for consumers. The Hong Kong protests, and there's been criticism. I mean, there's going to be criticism every day, as you know, you're used to it by now with the Trump administration, but that we've pulled back from our role in the world as supporters of freedom. And by saying we're neutral on what's happening is creating a vacuum where we should be there saying we're with the people that are looking for freedom and freedom of expression and everything else.
I think what the president said was that this is a tough situation and he hopes it works out well for all parties.
Should we be taking a stronger tack again? Are the trade negotiations making it harder for us to lead in a way that we would have in the past, would you say?
I don't know that we would have done anything different in the past. What would we do? Invade Hong Kong? You know,
we might warn China overtly in very strong terms that we're watching what's happening with, no one wants another Tiananmen, obviously.
The president has made clear that he is watching very carefully what's happening. He talked about the possibility of troop buildups in Shenzhen. So it's not that we're not watching it. It's a question of what role is there for the U.S. in that matter. This is an internal matter.
Okay. We've been hearing a lot about ag buys, and we've been hearing less about IP and some of the other bigger issues. Is it possible with the election coming, and it's getting closer, I can't believe how fast time goes, but is it possible that it becomes some type of, we get some big ag buys and we have some resolution of Huawei and that's all we get with the president? At that point say, all right, this is all we're going to get, and we'll in the next if he's reelected, we'll revisit this, but we're going to sort of agree to disagree on these other things?
Well, the president's the ultimate arbiter of trade policy, obviously enough, but I haven't heard him come off the very firm objective that we need structural reform, that this is really, after all about the Section 301 action that we brought. All these tariffs are Section 301. And the purpose of Section 301 was to induce the structural reform.
But there's been an expectation that there would potentially be a short-term set of deliverables and then a longer-term set of deliverables. If you have a reprieve on Huawei and some agricultural buys, then that would usher in a period of productive discussions where the two sides can continue to negotiate some of these tougher issues instead of just not talking at all. But that would push the longer-term outcome farther down the road.
That's a whole theory as to how the talks may evolve. There's no basis for that.
Do you think,
no basis for saying that.
Have you had a discussion, or within the administration, has there been a discussion on how the Hong Kong situation plays into the negotiations and whether it emboldens President Xi because of nationalism rising in mainland China, or whether it's something that just adds to his all the balls that he's got in the air right now? This is not a great time to be having a slowing economy or something affected by a trade war, when you wonder whether this is the beginning of something.
Well, there are lots of speculations that lots of people have. The truth is, we don't really know.
Does it help our negotiations, or does it hurt in our negotiations to get concessions?
I don't think we know the answer just yet, because we also don't know what the outcome will be of the Hong Kong situation.
I just wonder, whether long term we think that how important it is for China to continue to make progress economically, to sort of keep people, in the fold, and not, look beyond. I mean, if that were to slow, and the middle class emergence that we've seen were to slow, that would be a problem for President Xi and for the Communist Party.
The Chinese economy has been slowing. It's been slowing perceptibly. You saw their manufacturing output went up 4.8% in July. That's the lowest in, 15 years or some such time period. So there's no question that it's been slowing. There's also no question that a lot of the supply chains are moving elsewhere. Not some to the U.S., some to Mexico, some to Vietnam or other countries. So there are some other economic problems that are partly induced by the trade situation.
Some people said that move yesterday was purely a stock market put, and that the president had seen enough in terms of 1,000 points on the Dow or the volatility and the averages. He loves the stock market going higher. He loves a good economy. Do you think there's some truth to that?
No, because I know that decision had been planned quite a while before.
But the tariffs, the September 1st tariffs, weren't even announced until just a few weeks ago. So how long could it have been planned?
Well, we've been doing analysis since the hearings were announced by the USTR. There have been hearings and written papers submitted about the whole idea of this last batch of tariffs. So even though they were only announced as being imposed recently, the analytical work had begun well before that.
I'd like to ask about your dialogue with Congress right now. Lawmakers are out right now, but come September, there are going to be a lot of efforts, bipartisan efforts, to try to tie the administration's hands on tariffs. Do you think any of them will be successful? Are you having any conversations with them about how to craft this legislation so that it's effective?
Well, there's been legislation proposed by one member of Congress or another for the last couple of years. So
but
that's
Senator Grassley, who chairs Senate Finance, which has jurisdiction over trade, has said he's open to working with all of the lawmakers who are interested in this to find something that suits everybody.
Sure, and if you look back, I think you'll find that Chairman Grassley has made similar statements in the past. That's not new.
But what about the efforts from Senators Van Hollen and Cotton, who are trying to limit what you're able to do on Huawei?
Well, we'll see what they do.
So
where we are on Huawei is where we are.
As a private sector turnaround guy, you would go into auto parts or mining or oil and gas, and whenever you went in, it was because they had way too much debt. So you know about that. You see what's happening in our balance sheet in the United States, and rates are low, But do you look at this now and say, wow, if this, I know you can't equate private sector and public sector debt, but is there a problem yet in your mind with the amount of debt that we're running up?
I think the key to our debt situation is how fast the economy grows. If the economy grows at 3+%, the debt problem is not a big problem.
And in 10 months, last year was $1 trillion. In 10 months, we're there already this year. And then we weren't even talking about entitlements and what we owe there, Wilbur. I mean, is anyone worried?
Absolute amounts aren't really the issue. It's the relative amounts relative to the size of the GDP. The important thing is, can we grow at 3 or 3+%?
But can I ask you a question about that, which is it hasn't? And you look at the tax policy and all of the things that have been implemented, what the president laid out as the goal, and that line has never been hit yet in a meaningful way. So do you look at that and say, we have not succeeded yet? Are you willing to?
No, take, for example, the most recent quarter. Boeing's problems with the 737 MAX probably took something like 0.4% off. That will come back when the 737 MAX problems are ultimately fixed. We think that the economy is strong. The economy is headed in a good direction. The key to growing at 3% is three things. Amount of people in the working age population. That's already been pretty well set. Second, labor force participation, and that's starting to go up. That's important. And then the third thing is productivity. If those three add up to 3%, we go at 3%.
It's 50% faster than than the previous 8 years. 2.4, 2.5 versus 1.7. So just, not for nothing. But
Mr. Secretary, you have the Huawei issue coming up, but you have the census situation in the rear view. I just want to ask how long you intend to continue serving in this role and what conversations you've had with the president.
Well, you remind me with your repeated suggestions that I'm departing of what P.T. Barnum said when they published his obituary, namely that the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated.
Right.
I never reported that you were dying. I reported that cabinet members serve at the pleasure of the president, and sometimes the pleasures of the president change.
I'm not going to debate with you, but you went well beyond that.
Well, I think you love doing this because you love answering these questions. You're like, ready, bring it on. You're always like that with us, Wilbur. You like to argue, don't you?
Well, this is the most stimulating thing I've done in the last 20 years.
Squawk Box?
No, not Squawk Box.
Okay. I knew what you meant.
Although with a little more belligerent questioning, it might be Squawk Box as well.
Wilbur, Secretary Ross, great having you on for an extended interview, especially in the studio.
Thanks.